The night I stood in that marble bathroom holding a pill bottle that didn't belong to any prescription I had ever seen, that was the night I understood that I had not married into wealth. I had married into a war. The house was silent around me. Not the peaceful kind of silent, the way a house gets late at night when everyone is resting and the world feels still. This was a different kind of quiet. The kind that feels like it's listening to you. Like the walls have ears and they are reporting back to someone. I stood barefoot on cold marble floors, the kind of floors that cost more than I used to make in a year at the bakery. In my right hand was a small orange pill bottle. The label had a long medical name I didn't recognize. In my left hand was my phone, screen still glowing from my search. My hands were shaking. Down the hall in the large master bedroom, my husband Edward Whitmore was asleep. I could hear his breathing even from where I stood. Slow, labored, heavy. Like each breath was a negotiation. The doctor said his body was shutting down. They said the disease was progressing faster than expected. They said we should prepare ourselves. But the pill bottle in my hand said something else entirely. I whispered to myself in that cold bathroom, to no one, to the silence. Someone in this house wants him dead. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach drop all the way to the floor, was that I already had a feeling about who it was. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story didn't start in a mansion. It started in a hospital room in Nashville, Tennessee, with my brother's hand in mine and a number on a piece of paper that I couldn't stop staring at. My name is Grace Holloway. I am 67 years old. I have silver hair that I stopped fighting a long time ago, reading glasses I'm always losing, and hands that have been dusted in flour more mornings than I can count. I've lived a quiet life. A small life, some might say. I was married once, for 22 years, to a good and gentle man named Roy. When Roy passed, I kept the house, kept the bakery job, kept putting one foot in front of the other the way women of my generation learned to do. I had one brother, Robert Holloway, 60 years old, 6'2", stubborn as an old mule, and the funniest person I have ever known in my life. Robert could make you laugh in the middle of your worst day. He had this way of looking at a situation, no matter how bad, and finding the one ridiculous detail that made everything feel survivable. We grew up together in a small house outside of Knoxville. 2 bedrooms, 4 kids, a roof that leaked when it rained hard enough. We were not wealthy people. We were not even comfortable people. But we were loved, and we knew it, and that counted for something. Robert was the only family I had left. So when the doctor sat across from us in that small consultation room and said the word, cancer, I felt the floor shift underneath me. Stage 3, aggressive, treatable, but only with a specialized protocol that the local hospital wasn't equipped to handle. The number on the paper was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I sold my house. I cashed out my retirement savings. I worked double shifts at Henderson's Bakery 6 days a week until my feet ached so badly I could barely drive home. I called every charity, every foundation, every program I could find online at 2 in the morning with my reading glasses sliding down my nose. It wasn't enough. One evening, Robert reached over from his hospital bed and took my hand. His grip was still strong. That was one of the things about Robert. Even sick, he felt solid. "Grace," he said, "stop trying to carry the whole world." "I'm not stopping," I told him. "I know you're not." He squeezed my hand. "But I need you to hear me. I am not afraid." I looked at my little brother, my big little brother with his gray stubble and his tired eyes, and I thought, well, I am. I'm afraid enough for both of us. That was the week I met Edward Whitmore. It happened the way so many unexpected things happen. Quietly, sideways, without any announcement at all. Henderson's Bakery had a contract with a catering company that occasionally brought us on for large events. I'd done it a handful of times over the years. Charity galas, corporate dinners, that sort of thing. Good extra money, long hours, lots of standing in the back near the food tables trying not to be noticed. This particular evening was a fundraiser at a beautiful venue downtown Nashville. I wore my plain navy dress, the one I'd worn to every work event for the past 4 years, and carried in 2 large boxes of pastries. My hands still had traces of flour in the creases of my knuckles. I remember thinking I should have scrubbed harder. The room was full of people in gowns and suits that cost more than my car. Crystal chandeliers. A string quartet in the corner. The kind of event where I always feel slightly invisible, which honestly is perfectly fine with me. I was arranging the last of the dessert trays when I heard it, a cough from across the room. Not a polite little throat-clearing cough, a deep, rattling, prolonged cough that cut right through the string quartet. I looked up. A tall man in a black suit stood near the window, slightly apart from everyone else. He was broad-shouldered but thin, the way men get when they've been ill for a while. Like their frame remembers being bigger. Silver hair, neatly kept. He had the bearing of a man who had spent decades being the most important person in every room he entered, and now, in this moment, he simply looked tired. He was still coughing. Nobody moved toward him. I don't know why I did. I just did. I picked up a glass of water from the nearest tray and walked across the room. "Here," I said, holding it out. "Sir, here." He looked up at me, startled. He took the glass, drank slowly, and the coughing subsided. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath, and then he looked at me with these pale blue eyes that were more alert than the rest of him seemed. "Thank you," he said. "Of course. Are you all right?" He almost smiled. "I have been better, but you're the first person who's asked me that tonight." He glanced around the glittering room. "Or in quite a while, actually." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and started to turn back toward the dessert table. "What's your name?" he asked. "Grace," I said. "Grace Holloway." "Edward Whitmore," he said, and extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm but careful, like he was conserving something. I didn't know who he was until I got home that night and mentioned the event to my neighbor Linda, who looked at me like I'd said I'd bumped into the president at the grocery store. "Edward Whitmore?" she said. "Grace. He owns half the hospitals in Tennessee." 2 weeks later, he walked into Henderson's bakery at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning. I was behind the counter. I had flour on my apron, a pencil tucked behind my ear, and I was in the middle of explaining to a customer why we were out of the blueberry Danish. I looked up, and there he was, Edward Whitmore, in a quieter suit this time, standing just inside the door like he wasn't entirely sure of his welcome. I finished with the customer and walked over. "Mr. Whitmore," I said. "Mrs. Holloway." He almost smiled again. He seemed like a man who had forgotten how to do it fully. "I wonder if you might have a few minutes." We sat at the small corner table by the window. I brought him coffee. He took it black, and a piece of the almond coffee cake that had just come out of the oven. He ate it slowly and carefully, like someone whose appetite had become a complicated thing. Then he set down his fork and looked at me directly. "I'm going to say something that may sound very strange," he said, "and I want to ask you to hear me out before you respond." "All right," I said. "Marry me, Grace." The bakery kept going around us. The espresso machine hissed. Someone laughed near the front door. I sat very still. "I'm sorry?" "I know how it sounds." He folded his hands on the table. "I've been diagnosed with a progressive illness. The doctors have given me approximately 4 months, possibly less, possibly a little more. They're not entirely certain." He said it the way you say a fact about the weather. Matter of fact. Resigned. "I have 2 adult children, a son, Nathan, and a daughter, Diane. They are busy people. They visit when they can." He paused. "I don't want to die alone, Grace. And in that room 2 weeks ago, surrounded by 200 people who all know my net worth to the decimal point, you were the only one who brought me a glass of water." I stared at him. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry or simply stand up and walk away. "Mr. Whitmore," I started. Edward. I pressed my hands flat on the table. "I have to be honest with you about something." I'd prefer it. So I told him. I told him about Robert, about the diagnosis, about the treatment, about the number on the piece of paper that I hadn't been able to stop thinking about for 3 months. I told him about selling the house and the double shifts and the 2 a.m. internet searches. I told him all of it because if this man was going to make me an offer, he was going to make it with the full truth in front of him. Edward listened without interrupting. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If you marry me, your brother's treatment will be fully covered. The best facility in the country. For as long as he needs." The bakery kept going around us. The world kept going around us. "Why?" I asked. "Because you were honest with me when you didn't have to be. and because I could use a little honesty in my house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I forgot to drink, and I prayed. I asked God if I was doing something wrong. I went back and forth for hours. This is desperate. This is practical. This is a transaction. This is survival. What would Roy think? What would Mama think? What do I think? Finally, near 2 a.m, I called Robert. He picked up on the second ring. He'd always been a light sleeper. I told him everything. There was a long pause on his end. Then, "Grace, don't do this for me." "Robert, I mean it. Don't you dare marry a stranger to pay for my hospital bills. I will figure something out." "Robert," I said his name quietly, "you've been my person since I was 7 years old. You are not going to figure something out. You are going to let me take care of this." Another long pause. "Is he a good man?" Robert finally asked. I thought about the way Edward had sat in that bakery and listened to me without once checking his phone. The way he'd said I could use a little honesty in my house like it was something rare and valuable he'd been searching for. "I think so," I said. "I think he might be." "Then I'll pray for both of you," Robert said. "Every single day." The wedding was small. That was the right word for it. Small. Not sad, just small. The hospital chapel, late on a Thursday afternoon. Gray winter light through the high windows. Gerald Ashworth, Edward's attorney of 30 years, stood as witness. So did Dorothy, the housekeeper who'd been with Edward for 15 years and who shook my hand with both of hers and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read then. I wore a cream-colored dress I'd bought off the rack 2 days before. Edward wore a dark suit and looked both dignified and exhausted, the way he always seemed to look. The officiant asked if we took each other. We said that we did. Edward placed a simple gold band on my finger. We did not kiss, just a brief press of his hand over mine, like a promise sealed quietly between two people who understood the terms. Nathan and Diane were not there. They were traveling, Edward told me. Business. I filed that information away. The Whitmore estate was 40 minutes outside of Nashville. A long private drive through iron gates, past grounds that a full-time gardener kept immaculate even in January. The house itself was enormous. 14 bedrooms, marble floors throughout, a staircase that curved upward like something out of a movie, paintings on every wall that I later learned were worth more than most people's homes. It was beautiful. It was also one of the coldest places I had ever been in my life, and I don't mean the temperature. Dorothy met us at the door. She took my coat with both hands and said, "Welcome, Mrs. Holloway." She was the only one in that house who ever called me that, I would later realize. And then her eyes met mine for just a half-second longer than necessary, and something passed across her face. Something like sorrow. Something like warning. I thought about it later. I should have asked her about it right then. Nathan and Diane arrived for dinner that first evening. I had been in the house for 4 hours. I was still learning where the light switches were. Nathan Whitmore was 52, tall like his father, but sharper in every feature. Sharp jaw, sharp eyes, the kind of tan that comes from ski trips rather than yard work. He shook my hand at the dinner table and said, "Welcome to the family," and then looked past me to ask Dorothy about the wine selection. He did not look at me again for the remainder of the meal. Diane Whitmore was 46, polished in the way that takes real effort and real money to maintain. Perfect hair, perfect posture. A smile that appeared and disappeared like a light switch. She hugged me when she arrived. A full hug, both arms warm and close. And when her face was next to mine, she said very softly right against my ear, "Welcome to the family, Grace. Enjoy it while it lasts." She pulled back and her smile was wide and lovely. My skin crawled from my neck all the way down my spine. That night, lying in my room down the hall from Edward's, listening to the enormous house settle around me, I stared at the ceiling and thought, something is very wrong here. I just didn't know yet how wrong, or how dangerous. The answer came 31 days later in a marble bathroom at 2 a.m, with a pill bottle in my shaking hands. And once I knew, I could never unknow it. The doctors came to the house twice a week. Dr. Philip Hartley was Edward's primary physician, a careful, quiet man around 50 who always shook Edward's hand before and after each visit, and who spoke in measured, precise sentences. He adjusted medications regularly, He ordered tests. He looked at charts with the same expression a man wears when he is solving a problem he cannot quite solve. Edward's health kept declining, faster, it seemed, than even the doctors expected. I asked one of the visiting nurses once, quietly, privately, as she was packing up her bag in the hallway, "Is this progression normal? It seems very fast." She didn't answer right away. She zipped her bag, she straightened up, and then she looked at me and said, "His case is complicated," in the careful tone of someone who is choosing every single word. I thanked her and watched her go. His case is complicated. I turned those words over in my mind for days. I began paying attention differently after that. Not obviously. Not in any way that anyone would notice. I am 67 years old, and I have spent 67 years being underestimated, which turns out to be its own kind of superpower. I noticed that Diane prepared Edward's morning tea herself every single day. No one else touched it. If Dorothy started toward the kettle, Diane would appear from nowhere. "I'll do it, Dorothy. I know exactly what he needs." Every morning, without exception. I noticed that Nathan had taken to accompanying Edward to all medical appointments, speaking for him more and more, filling in answers before Edward could give them himself. I noticed that Edward looked smaller every week, thinner, slower, like something was consuming him from the inside, steadily, patiently. And then came the night of the pill bottles. Edward had been having trouble sleeping. His night medications were kept in the master bathroom. I'd gotten into the habit of bringing them to him at bedtime since I was usually still awake reading. I knew the bottles. I knew their labels. Small white pills, 2 capsules, 1 oval tablet. I could have identified them in the dark. That night I reached for the small tray on the bathroom shelf and I stopped. There were 2 bottles that didn't belong. They were tucked toward the back, half behind a box of tissues. Different shape from the others, different label. I picked one up and turned it toward the light. The name on the label was long and pharmaceutical. I'd never seen it before. I opened my phone and typed it in. My hands started shaking before I even finished reading. This medication was not for Edward's condition. It was used for something else entirely, and in sustained elevated doses, the kind that would be very hard to detect without specifically looking, it caused progressive organ deterioration. Liver, kidneys. Exactly what Edward's doctors said was happening to him. I put that bottle down and picked up the second one. Same category, different name, same result. I stood in that marble bathroom for what felt like a very long time. The house was so quiet. Outside the small frosted window, the January wind moved through the grounds without a sound. I opened the cabinet under the sink. There, pushed to the back behind spare soap and cleaning supplies, were 3 more empty bottles. Same labels, hidden, deliberately hidden. Someone, I thought, very carefully, is doing this on purpose. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow footsteps, deliberate. I shoved the bottles back into place, turned off the bathroom light, and straightened up just as the door swung open. Diane stood in the doorway. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair loose, holding a glass of water like she'd come down for a midnight drink. She looked at me without any surprise at all. "Can't sleep, Grace?" she said. Her voice was warm. Her eyes were not. "Just getting Edward's medication," I said. I held up the regular bottles. The ones I knew, the ones that belonged there. She stepped into the bathroom. Her perfume was strong and floral and very expensive. She moved past me toward the sink, turned on the tap, filled her glass. Then she turned to look at me. "Be careful with his dosage," she said softly. "Too much of the wrong thing can be very dangerous." She smiled. She walked back out. I stood there until I heard her bedroom door close down the hall. Then I sat down on the edge of the bathtub because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. She knew. She knew exactly what was in those bottles. She had practically told me so, standing right there, smiling, watching my face to see if I understood. I understood. I sat in that cold bathroom for a long time, listening to Edward breathe down the hall, and I made myself a promise. I will not let them hurt you. And underneath that promise, quiet and cold and clear as the marble floor beneath my feet, was one more thought. They have no idea what they've brought into this house. If you're still with me right now, I want you to know this was only the beginning, because what I discovered over the next few weeks went far deeper than 2 bottles hidden in a bathroom. It reached into the hospital itself. It reached into the will. And it reached into a secret that Edward had been carrying alone. A secret that would change everything I thought I understood about why he had married me. Stay with me. Because the truth, when it finally came, it came like a storm. The morning after this bathroom, I woke up before sunrise. I lay in the dark for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house. Part of me wanted to believe I had imagined it, that I had been tired and frightened and my mind had built something terrible out of nothing. People do that, scared people especially. But I had not imagined the bottles. I had not imagined the search result glowing on my phone screen at 2 a.m, and I had not imagined the way Diane had looked at me in that bathroom doorway. Calm, measuring, with the particular stillness of someone who is not surprised by what they found. I got up, washed my face, and made a decision. I was not going to panic. I was not going to confront anyone. Not yet. Not without something solid in my hands. I was going to watch. I had spent 40 years being invisible in rooms that weren't mine. Charity events, corporate catering jobs, other people's kitchens. I knew how to move through a space without disturbing it. How to be present without being noticed. How to listen to a conversation from 12 feet away while appearing to be completely absorbed in arranging pastries on a tray. I put those skills to work. Every morning I positioned myself in the sitting room off the kitchen with a book and a cup of coffee before Diane came downstairs. The sitting room had a sight line straight through to the kitchen counter. I turned pages at regular intervals. I did not look up too often. Diane came down at 7:30 each morning, precise as a clock. She went directly to the kettle. She prepared Edward's herbal tea herself. Loose leaves from a particular tin she kept in the upper cabinet, the one with the blue lid. She never let the tin out of her sight. When she was done, she carried the cup upstairs herself and set it on Edward's bedside table. Every single morning. I started taking note on my phone. Date, time, what I observed. I kept the notes in a folder labeled recipe ideas that nobody would think to open. On the 4th day, I found a quiet moment with Dorothy. Dorothy was 55, a solid, kind-faced woman who had worked in this house since before Nathan and Diane had finished college. She knew where everything was. She knew everyone's habits. She had said almost nothing to me since my arrival. Not unfriendly, just careful. The way longtime employees learn to be careful in complicated households. I chose my moment carefully. Nathan had gone to a meeting in the city. Diane was upstairs with Edward. I found Dorothy in the laundry room, folding linens with the methodical calm of someone who has done the same task 10,000 times. "Dorothy," I said, keeping my voice easy and conversational. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up. Her eyes were warm but guarded. "Of course, Mrs. Holloway." "Has Miss Diane always prepared Mr. Whitmore's morning tea, even before I arrived?" Dorothy's hands slowed on the linen she was folding. Just slightly, just enough for me to notice. "Yes," she said. "Ever since he got sick. She said she knows exactly what his diet requires." "And no one else prepares it? Not you? Not the cook?" "Miss Diane is very particular about it." Dorothy looked back down at her folding. "She says she knows exactly what he needs." She had used that phrase twice now. Exactly what he needs. Like she was repeating something she'd been told to say. I thanked her and left the laundry room. Standing in the hallway, I wrote in my phone, "Diane alone prepares tea. Daily. Without exception. Dorothy aware." Then I went upstairs to sit with Edward. He was awake, propped against his pillows, the morning light pale and thin through the curtains. The teacup was on the bedside table, half empty. I felt my stomach tighten looking at it. "Good morning," I said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Grace?" He said my name like it was something he was glad to have in the room. "You're up early?" "I'm always up early. Baker's habit." He smiled, the real kind, the kind that reached his eyes. Those smiles were becoming more precious to me the rarer they got. We talked for almost an hour that morning, about small things mostly. He asked about Robert's latest treatment update. I told him the doctors were cautiously optimistic. He nodded slowly and said, "Good, that's good." Like it genuinely mattered to him, because it did. I had learned that about Edward in these weeks. He meant what he said, every time. There was no performance in him. Somewhere in that hour, between talking about Robert and talking about a book Edward had been trying to read, I understood something clearly. I was not sitting beside this bed out of obligation anymore. I was sitting here because I wanted to. Because this man was kind and lonely and was being slowly destroyed by the people who were supposed to love him, and that was something I could not walk away from. Not for any price. "You seem thoughtful this morning," Edward said, watching me. "I'm always thinking," I told him. "It's a hazard." He reached over and covered my hand with his. His fingers were cool and thin. "Whatever you're thinking about," he said quietly, "I'm glad you're here." I turned my hand over and held his. "So am I," I said, and I meant it completely. 3 days later, Edward collapsed at the breakfast table. One moment he was lifting his coffee cup. The next moment the cup was on the floor and Edward was following it, and the sound of it, the crash and then the terrible silence, brought everyone running. I was in the doorway when it happened. I saw everything. Nathan shouted for help. His voice was loud, urgent, convincingly panicked. He dropped to his knees beside his father, and he looked, to any outside observer, exactly like a frightened son. But I was watching his hands. When the paramedics came through the front door and the attention in the room swung toward Edward, in that small window of redirected focus, Nathan stood up, and as he straightened, his hand swept across the kitchen counter and closed around something small, something orange. A pill bottle. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket in one smooth, practiced motion. He thought no one saw. I saw. In the ambulance, I sat beside Edward and held his hand and kept my face very still. The paramedic asked me questions about his medications and his recent symptoms. I answered clearly and carefully. I gave them the correct prescriptions, the ones Dr. Hartley had authorized. I did not mention what I had seen Nathan take from the counter. Not yet. Not without knowing exactly what I was dealing with. The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and fluorescent light. I sat in a plastic chair outside Edward's room while machines beeped behind the door and nurses moved past me with the brisk, purposeful walk of people who have seen every kind of fear and learned to keep moving through it. Nathan was at the other end of the hallway, speaking quietly with Dr. Hartley. His posture was the posture of a concerned son, shoulders slightly forward, head tilted, nodding gravely. He was very good at it. I watched him the way you watch something that looks like one thing, but keeps making you feel like it's something else entirely. Diane arrived 20 minutes later, heels clicking on the hospital floor, a cashmere coat over her arm. She went immediately to Nathan's side. They exchanged a look, brief, fast, almost imperceptible, the kind of look that carries a full conversation in a single second. I stood up. "Dr. Hartley," I said, walking toward him, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Nathan's eyes moved to me, sharp, alert. Dr. Hartley nodded, and we stepped a few paces down the hall, around a slight corner, out of comfortable earshot. I kept my voice very calm, very measured. "Doctor, I want to ask you something directly. Is there anything in Edward's recent test results that doesn't match what you would expect from his diagnosed condition?" Dr. Hartley looked at me carefully. He was a precise man, a careful man. I watched him decide something behind his eyes. "Mrs. Holloway," he said slowly, "his condition is complex." "I know that," I said, "but I'm asking specifically whether his deterioration is consistent with the disease, or whether something else might be contributing." A long pause. "Why would you ask that?" I held his gaze. "Because I found medication at home that does not match anything you prescribed, and I need to know if you've noticed anything irregular." "Doctor." Hartley's expression shifted in a way that told me everything before he said a word. His brows tightened, his jaw set. "What medication?" "The medication list was updated 2 weeks ago," I said. "By the family. Do you know what was added?" Before he could answer, Nathan's voice came from behind my shoulder. "Grace." He had walked over without my noticing. He was very good at that, too. "Everything all right?" His hand landed on my shoulder. Light, friendly seeming, but his fingers pressed just a fraction too firmly. "We were discussing Edward's treatment," Dr. Hartley said carefully. "Of course." Nathan's thumb pressed slightly. "My stepmother is understandably overwhelmed, doctor. This has been very difficult for all of us." I reached up and removed his hand from my shoulder. I did it slowly, deliberately, without making a scene. I simply lifted his hand and stepped to the side. "I am not overwhelmed," I said, looking at Dr. Hartley. "I am asking questions." Nathan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes did. Dr. Hartley cleared his throat. Perhaps we should review the complete medication protocol again. Nathan turned toward him smoothly. I think that would put Grace's mind at ease. She's new to all of this. A small, warm laugh. We appreciate everything you're doing, Doctor. Doctor. Hartley gave a short nod and moved away down the hall. Nathan watched him go. Then he turned to me, and this time the warmth dropped out of his face like a curtain falling. What are you doing? He said quietly. My job, I said, taking care of my husband. You're asking questions that are going to cause confusion and distress for everyone involved. Or they're going to cause clarity, I said. I suppose it depends on what the answers are. He studied me for a long moment. Then he leaned slightly closer. Not threatening, just close enough to make the conversation private. You're new here, Grace. You don't understand how things work in this family. My father's illness is difficult for all of us. The last thing he needs is his wife stirring up doubt and suspicion at a time like this. A pause. Be careful. Stress has a way of making people see things that aren't there. His voice was kind. His eyes were a warning. I smiled pleasantly. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Thank you, Nathan. That evening, while Nathan and Diane went home to change, I stayed. I sat beside Edward's bed in the quiet room and held his hand and watched him breathe. The machines kept their steady rhythm. Outside the window, the city lights came on one by one against the dark. I leaned close and spoke very softly. You are not dying from this disease, I told him. Someone is hurting you, and I am going to find a way to stop it. He didn't stir, but I felt his fingers move against mine, barely, like the thought of movement rather than the thing itself. And I chose to believe he heard me. Around midnight, a nurse came in with a small medication tray. I stood up. May I see what you're administering? I asked. She looked briefly surprised, but showed me the tray. Standard medications, and then one pill I recognized from my phone search. The same category, same effect. What is that one for? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She checked her chart. It was added to his prescription 2 weeks ago. Added by whom? It says updated by his primary and approved by family. Which family member? She hesitated. It lists Mr. Nathan Whitmore as the authorizing contact. I looked at the pill on the tray. Small, ordinary looking. Something you would swallow without a second thought if someone you trusted had put it there. Please call Dr. Hartley, I said. Tonight, before you give him that. Dr. Hartley arrived within 15 minutes. I had the sense he had been waiting for a reason to come. We stepped into the hallway. I told him everything. The bottles in the bathroom, the empties hidden under the sink, the medication I'd just seen on the tray. I spoke clearly and quietly and without dramatics, the way you speak when you need someone to actually hear you. Dr. Hartley listened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking down at the floor with the expression of a man who is recalibrating. Then he said, 3 weeks ago, I raised concerns about the rate of Edward's deterioration. I flagged it in my notes. I was told the family had brought in a consulting specialist and that the medication protocol had been adjusted accordingly. Adjusted by Nathan. The authorization came through Nathan's office, yes. He looked up at me. I should have followed up more aggressively. I had concerns and I allowed myself to be reassured. He said it plainly, without excusing himself. I'm sorry, Mrs. Holloway. Don't be sorry yet, I said. Help me. He ordered the questionable medication removed from Edward's protocol immediately, pending full review. He requested an independent blood panel, outside the regular testing protocol sent to a separate lab. Nathan arrived at the hospital the next morning and was not pleased. He found me in the hallway outside Edward's room, and his composure was thinner than it had been. You had his medications changed. Dr. Hartley had his medications reviewed, I said. On your request. On my concern. I kept my voice even. As his wife. You have no medical authority here. My father signed power of attorney to me before his condition worsened. I make the decisions. Medical decisions, I said. Yes, I know. His eyes narrowed. Then you understand that interfering with his care is exactly what I intend to keep doing, I said, until I'm satisfied he's safe. The silence between us was thick and still. You're making a mistake, he said finally. That's possible, I agreed. But it's mine to make. That afternoon I went to Robert. The treatment center was 40 minutes from the hospital, a clean, well-lit facility with a garden out back that Robert liked to sit in when the weather allowed. He was in one of the garden chairs when I found him, wrapped in a fleece blanket, reading a paperback Western. He looked better than he had in months. The treatment was working. He looked up at me and his expression changed immediately. "You look like you haven't slept properly in a week," he said. "5 days," I said, sitting down beside him. I told him everything. I didn't leave out any of it. The bottles, Nathan's medication changes, Dr. Hartley's admission, the midnight confrontation with Diane. I spoke quietly and steadily and watched my brother's face move through surprise and anger and something that settled into a deep, focused calm. When I finished, he set down his book. "Grace," he said, "you know what you have to do. I need proof first. Real proof. If I go to the police with suspicion and they deny everything, Nathan has legal authority over everything. He'll shut me out entirely." "Then get the proof," Robert said simply, "and don't you dare stay quiet while you're getting it." He took my hand. His grip was still strong. "Silence only protects the people doing wrong," he said. "You taught me that. 3rd grade. You made me tell Mama when Tommy Briggs was stealing lunch money from the little kids." I laughed despite everything. I forgot about Tommy Briggs. "I didn't," Robert said. "Because you were right." He squeezed my hand. "You're right now, too." I did not go home that night. Instead, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot with the seat reclined slightly and the heater running low, and I waited. I wasn't entirely sure what I was waiting for. A feeling, maybe. The particular restlessness that had been sitting at the base of my throat for days. At 10:23, I saw Diane's car pull into the lot. She parked in the far corner, away from the main entrance lights. She got out, her coat pulled close, and she walked, not toward the main entrance, not toward the visitor entrance, but around the side of the building toward the service corridor. I was out of my car before I'd made a conscious decision to move. I followed at distance, keeping to the shadowed side of the building, my shoes quiet on the pavement. The side entrance she was heading for was a staff door, the kind with a keypad, the kind that required a code or a badge. Diane didn't hesitate at the door. It opened from the inside. Someone was waiting for her. I moved to the small wire-reinforced window set into the door and looked through. The corridor inside was empty except for 2 figures standing near a supply cart, Diane and a woman in nursing scrubs. They were not arguing. They were not whispering. They were standing easily, almost casually, like 2 people who had done this before. The nurse said something and both of them smiled. Then the nurse reached into her scrub pocket and produced a small flat packet. No label. Folded over once. Diane took it and put it directly into her coat pocket. My phone was in my hand. I raised it to the window and took the photo. The glass was smudged and the corridor lighting was dim and the image was blurry. But it showed 2 figures clearly enough, and the exchange and the packet passing between them. I walked back to my car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. I sat in the driver's seat and breathed carefully and deliberately, the way you breathe when you're trying to keep your mind working instead of just your fear. Diane had someone inside the hospital, which meant that even here, even in a hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses and machines and oversight, Edward was not safe. I opened my phone and looked at the blurry photograph. It's not enough, I thought. I need more. And then my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You should not have interfered. I stared at the screen. Another message appeared beneath it. Accidents happen. I looked up through the windshield at the dark parking lot. The lights. The ordinary cars. The hospital entrance with its ordinary steady glow. Was someone watching me right now? I put the car in drive. I went back to Robert's treatment center and sat in the parking lot there for an hour, too unsettled to go to the mansion, too alert to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I drove back to the hospital. I told the night desk I was staying with my husband. They gave me a visitor pass without question. I settled into the chair beside Edward's bed. The room was dim and warm, and the machines kept their steady rhythm, and gradually, over the next hour, my heartbeat slowed to something like normal. I hadn't realized how tight my chest had been until it wasn't. I must have drifted slightly. Not asleep, but the shallow, not-quite sleep of someone sitting in a chair in a hospital room at 3 in the morning. My eyes were closed. I was aware of the sounds around me. That was why I heard it. The door, opening quietly. More quietly than a nurse who had nothing to hide would bother to open a door. I kept my eyes closed. I kept my breathing even. Footsteps, soft, careful, moved past me toward the bed. I opened my eyes. Diane was standing beside Edward's bed. She was in her coat, like she'd come directly from outside. She had not turned on any lights. One hand rested on the bed rail. The other hand was held slightly behind her back. I stood up slowly from the chair. "What are you doing?" She turned quickly. For one fraction of a second, before her composure reassembled, I saw the shock on her face. She had thought I was asleep. She had thought I was gone. Grace, a breath, a recovery. I couldn't sleep. I came to check on him. In the middle of the night, I said. Through the service entrance. Something moved behind her eyes. "Show me your hand, Diane." "What?" "The hand behind your back." I stepped closer to the bed. "Show it to me." "You're being ridiculous. Show me your hand." The room was very still. The machines beeped. Edward breathed. Outside in the hallway, distant footsteps moved past the door without stopping. Slowly, Diane brought her right hand forward. In her palm was a small syringe. Capped. Prepared. The room seemed to contract around me. I looked at the syringe. I looked at her face. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't entirely name. Defiance and desperation woven together so tightly they'd become the same thing. "Give it to me," I said. Her fingers tightened around it. "You are ruining everything." "Everything," I repeated. The word tasted strange. "You mean the inheritance?" "You don't understand what this is," she said, and her voice cracked along its surface for the first time. "You walked in here 4 months ago with flour on your hands and a sob story about your sick brother, and now you're standing between me and everything I was supposed to have." "Everything you were supposed to have," I said. "Not earn, not build, just have." Her jaw tightened. "He was going to give it away. Do you understand that? All of it. To strangers. To research facilities. To some foundation with his name on a building that nobody in this family will ever set foot in. And that," I said quietly, "is worth killing him for." She flinched. The word, killing, landed in the room like something dropped. "I didn't," she started. Footsteps in the hallway. Getting closer. A voice. "Checking on room 412. Diane's hand moved fast. The syringe disappeared into her coat pocket. She stepped back from the bed, smoothing her expression into something appropriate. The nurse came through the door. "Everything all right in here?" I looked at Diane. She looked at me. Her eyes were doing 2 things at once, pleading and warning, in equal measure. I thought about what would happen if I spoke right now. I thought about Nathan and his power of attorney and his lawyers and his ability to have me removed from this hospital before morning. I thought about the blurry photograph on my phone and the empty bottles in the kitchen cabinet and the blood results that weren't back yet. Not enough, I thought. Not yet. "Everything is fine," I said. I was just startled. I didn't hear my stepdaughter come in. The nurse nodded and withdrew. The door swung closed. Diane exhaled slowly. For a moment, she looked almost relieved. "You made a mistake," I said softly. She looked at me. Did I? "Tonight." I moved back to the chair beside Edward's bed and sat down. "You showed me exactly who you are, and I won't forget it." She stood very still for a moment. Then she walked out without another word. I sat in the chair and put my hand over Edward's and did not move until the sun came up. The independent blood test results came back 2 days later. Dr. Hartley called me into his office and closed the door and placed a folder on the desk in front of me and said, "Mrs. Holloway, after reviewing these results, I need to ask you directly. Do you believe someone is intentionally harming your husband?" "Yes," I said. "I do." He opened the folder. "The blood panel shows traces of a compound that should not be present at all. It is consistent with long-term, low-level ingestion of a hepatotoxic substance, something that over time produces exactly the kind of organ deterioration we've been observing." "His morning tea," I said. Dr. Hartley looked at me. "What makes you say that?" "Because it's the one thing prepared exclusively by one person every single day that goes directly to him." He was quiet for a moment. "If exposure stops immediately, his body may have the ability to stabilize, possibly improve." "Then we stop it," I said. I've already ordered that all food and beverages come exclusively from hospital preparation. Nothing from outside. He closed the folder. Mrs. Holloway, this needs to go beyond medicine. I know, I said. I'm working on it. He nodded. Work faster. That afternoon, the hospital administrator found me in the hallway outside Edward's room. Mrs. Holloway, she said, I'm sorry to inform you that effective immediately, your visiting access has been modified. I went still. Modified how? By legal authority granted to Mr. Nathan Whitmore, your visits are restricted to 2 hours per day, under supervision. This takes effect immediately. I looked down the hallway. Nathan was standing at the far end, by the elevator bank. He had his hands in his pockets and he was watching me with an expression of complete, patient composure. He had moved fast, faster than I'd expected. I walked toward him, all the way to the end of the hall. I stopped 3 feet from him and I looked him directly in the face. You think this stops me, I said. He tilted his head slightly. I think it slows you down, which is all I need. He studied me. Grace, listen to me. You are a 67-year-old woman from Tennessee who married my father 4 months ago. Whatever you think you know, whatever story you've built in your head, you have no legal standing, no proof, and no allies in this family. Walk away. Go back to your bakery. Robert's treatment will continue. I will make sure of that personally. You have my word. Your word, I said. My word. I looked at this man, this polished, controlled, frightened man, and I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, something quieter than anger, something that had better aim. Nathan, I said, if I came here for money, I would have stayed silent and watched your father die. That would have been the smart thing, the safe thing. I held his gaze. The fact that I'm standing here in this hallway telling you that you do not scare me, that should tell you everything about what I came here for. His jaw tightened. You made one mistake, I said. What mistake? I stepped back. You underestimated me. I turned and walked away down the hallway. I did not look back. I did not let him see my hands shaking. That night, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for the 2nd time that week, and I made a phone call. Not to the police, not yet. I called Gerald Ashworth. He picked up on the 2nd ring. Mrs. Holloway, he said. I've been waiting for this call. I gripped the phone tighter. You were expecting me? Edward asked me 6 weeks ago to wait for a call from you specifically. He said if his condition suddenly worsened, if things moved faster than they should, you would be the one who called. The parking lot lights blurred in front of me. He knew, I said. He suspected. He didn't know the extent of it. Gerald's voice was careful and measured. Come to my office tomorrow morning, Mrs. Holloway. Bring everything you have. And then? A brief pause. Then we end this. I drove home to the Whitmore estate that night for what I knew might be one of the last times. The house was dark and still. I walked through those cold marble halls and I thought about Edward lying in that hospital bed, and Robert in his garden chair with his Western paperback, and Dorothy folding linens with her careful hands and her carefully chosen words. I thought about what Robert had said. Silence only protects the people doing wrong. I had been patient. I had been careful. I had collected every piece I could find. Tomorrow, it was time to use them. Gerald Ashworth's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown Nashville. Quiet, wood-paneled, the kind of office that has been the same for 30 years because nothing about it needed to change. Books on every wall. A desk the size of a small boat. 2 windows looking out over the city in the gray morning light. Gerald himself matched the office. 65, silver-haired, unhurried. The kind of man who had seen enough of human nature over a long career that very little surprised him anymore, and who had learned that the most useful thing you could do in a difficult situation was simply be still and think clearly. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk and poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if I wanted one. I laid everything out on his desk, the photographs on my phone, the blurry image through the hospital service door, the pictures of the pill bottles, the empty containers I'd found hidden in the kitchen, the lothuk I had taken from the cabinet at the mansion, sealed in a small zip bag, the notes I'd kept in my phone under recipe ideas, dates, times, observations, every detail I could record. and the written summary Dr. Hartley had provided confirming the presence of a hepatotoxic compound in Edward's bloodstream. Gerald looked at each piece carefully. He did not rush. He asked 2 or 3 precise questions. He refilled my coffee cup without commenting on the fact that I hadn't touched the first one. When he had looked at everything, he set it all aside and folded his hands on the desk. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "I need to show you something." He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and removed a manila envelope, sealed, with Edward's handwriting across the front. Beside it, a second document, official, court-stamped, with the kind of formatting that means legal weight. He slid both across the desk toward me. "Edward signed these 6 weeks ago," he said. "He called me on a Tuesday evening and asked me to come to the hospital. He was very calm, very clear. He said he had reason to believe his condition was being influenced by someone close to him, though he didn't yet have certainty about who or how." My hands were in my lap. I pressed them flat against my thighs to keep them still. "He said he had married a woman," Gerald continued, "who looked at him like a person rather than an account balance. He said if anything happened, if things deteriorated faster than they should, that woman would be the one to call me." "He trusted me," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. Before you'd even given him a specific reason to," Gerald said. "Yes, that's exactly what he said." I opened the sealed envelope slowly. Inside was a letter in Edward's handwriting. Careful, slightly uneven. The penmanship of a man writing with hands that had grown less steady. 3 pages. I will not share every word of it here because some of it was private, the kind of private that belongs to the person it was written for. But I will tell you what it contained. Edward had known for several months before our marriage that something was wrong, not in the way I had known, not with pill bottles and photographs and blood tests. He had known it the way you know something about people you have loved for a long time and watched change. He had watched Nathan's visits shift from infrequent to purposeful, always with documents, always with questions about the estate. He had watched Diane's attention to his daily routine grow precise and particular in a way that felt less like care and more like management. He had not wanted to believe it. That was what he wrote, with the honesty of a man who had decided to stop protecting himself from the truth. I did not want to believe that the people I had raised could want this. I kept finding reasons to explain what I was seeing. I was good at that. Too good. But he had stopped explaining it away, and he had acted. The court document was a legal instrument, precisely drawn, precisely worded, that stated the following. In the event of suspected medical interference or foul play involving Edward Whitmore, and upon formal notification by his personal attorney, the medical and financial authority currently held by Nathan Whitmore would be suspended immediately and transferred to an independent court-appointed trustee, pending full investigation. The document had been filed with the court 6 weeks ago. Nathan's power of attorney, the thing he had used to restrict my hospital visits, to alter Edward's medications, to position himself as the single controlling voice in his father's care, was rendered void the moment Gerald Ashworth filed the notification, which he had done that morning, before I arrived. I looked up from the document. "It's already done?" I said. "It's already done," Gerald confirmed. "As of 8:15 this morning." I sat with that for a moment. The coffee had gone cold in front of me, and the city moved quietly outside the windows, and I thought about a man in a hospital bed who had been frightened and uncertain and slowly failing, who had looked at a woman with flour on her hands at a charity event and thought, that one I can trust. "He chose me before I chose him," I said. Gerald looked at me steadily. "I think he recognized something in you, Mrs. Holloway. The same thing Robert sees in you, I imagine. The same thing that made you walk across that room with a glass of water when everyone else looked away." I pressed my fingers to my mouth for a moment. Just a moment. Then I straightened up, picked up the court document, and said, "What happens now?" "Now," said Gerald Ashworth, "we go to the hospital." We arrived at the hospital at 10:45 in the morning. Gerald walked ahead of me with the particular unhurried certainty of a man who has done difficult things in difficult rooms for 30 years. Behind us, 2 officers from the Nashville police, not in uniform, not with sirens, just 2 steady, patient men who had been briefed and who understood the nature of what was happening here. Nathan was at the nurse's station when we came through the main doors. He saw Gerald first, and something changed in his face, something I had never seen there before, something small and involuntary. Diane was beside him, She saw Gerald a half-second later, and then she saw me behind him, and whatever she had been holding herself together with began very slightly to loosen. Gerald stopped in the center of the hallway. He did not raise his voice. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Nathan recovered quickly. He was good at recovering. "Gerald, what a surprise. I wasn't aware you had any business here today." "Your father requested my presence under specific circumstances," Gerald said. "Those circumstances have been met." He removed a copy of the court document from his briefcase and held it out. "Effective as of 8:15 this morning, your medical and financial authority over Edward Whitmore has been suspended pending a full legal and medical investigation. An independent trustee has been appointed by the court." Nathan did not take the document. He looked at it. "That is not possible," he said. His voice was still controlled, still practiced. "It is not only possible," Gerald said. "It is already done." He handed copies to the hospital administrator, who had been waiting quietly near the desk. She received them with the expression of someone who has been briefed and is relieved to finally have official paper in her hands. Nathan looked at the document. He looked at Gerald. He looked at me. And for the first time in all the weeks I had known him, for the first time since he had pressed my shoulder in that hospital hallway and told me I was imagining things, Nathan Whitmore had nothing to say. Diane made a sound beside him, small, involuntary, like something escaping. "This is absurd," she said. Her voice was thinner than I had ever heard it. "You can't simply accuse us." "No one has accused anyone publicly," Gerald said. "Yet." The word landed in the hallway and stayed there. The hospital administrator spoke quietly to her staff. The independent medical supervisor, a court-appointed physician who had been notified that morning, was already on her way up from the lobby. Nathan's authority in that building, carefully constructed over months, dissolved in under 4 minutes. That afternoon, the police went to the Whitmore estate. Not with drama, not with noise. Just a search warrant, 2 officers, and the methodical work of people who know what they're looking for and where to look. Dorothy met them at the door. I had called her that morning before Gerald and I left for the hospital. I had told her what was happening. I had told her that whatever she had seen, whatever she had been afraid to say, this was the moment to say it. That nothing Diane had threatened her with had any power anymore. There had been a long silence on the phone. Then Dorothy said very quietly, "I'll be here when they come." The officers found the bottles in the kitchen cabinet behind the cleaning supplies, the same ones I had photographed, the same kind I had carried in my purse as evidence. They found the tin with the blue lid, Diane's tin, the one she guarded every morning. They tested the remaining tea leaves on site. The result came back within the hour. The toxin was present, measurable, consistent with the compound found in Edward's bloodstream. Dorothy was in the kitchen when the results came back. She had not moved from the house all morning. She stood near the window with her arms folded across her chest and her face the color of old paper. The officer who spoke to her was patient and unhurried. "Mrs. Dorothy," he said, "did you have any knowledge of substances being added to Mr. Whitmore's tea?" Dorothy's arms tightened across her chest. 3 months ago, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I came into the kitchen early, before Miss Diane usually came down. I saw her at the counter with the tea tin open." "What did you observe?" "She had a small packet. She was adding something to the loose leaves. She didn't know I was there until she turned around." Dorothy paused. "She told me it was a supplement, a natural supplement for his condition. She said the doctor had recommended it." "Did you believe her?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "I had questions," she said finally. "But then she told me, if I said anything to anyone, she would have me dismissed. She said she would make sure I was blacklisted from every household in Nashville." Her jaw tightened. "I've worked in private homes for 30 years. It's all I know how to do. I have a daughter in college. She stopped." The officer waited. "I should have spoken," Dorothy said. "I knew something was wrong and I stayed quiet because I was afraid. And every morning after that, when I watched her carry that cup upstairs, Her voice broke cleanly, like something that had been under pressure for a very long time. "I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." I had come to the mansion by the time this conversation happened. I was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, listening. When Dorothy finished, I walked over to her. She turned to look at me and her face was undone with guilt. The particular guilt of a person who knows exactly what their silence cost. I put my hand on her arm. "Dorothy," I said, You're speaking now. I should have spoken sooner. Yes, I said. But you're speaking now, and that matters. She covered my hand with both of hers and held on. The officer noted her statement. Dorothy's testimony, 3 months of witnessed behavior, a direct observation of Diane adding a substance to the tea, a credible threat used to ensure her silence, was the final piece. It completed the chain. It made the picture undeniable. Nathan and Diane were brought to the Whitmore estate that evening for formal questioning. Their attorneys were present. The mood in that living room, the same room where I had eaten my first uncomfortable dinner in this house, where Diane had smiled at me across the table with those light switch eyes, was entirely different now. The paintings were the same. The furniture was the same. The light through the tall windows was the same pale gold of a Tennessee evening. Everything else had changed. The officers laid out the evidence on the coffee table, methodically, without theatrics. The photographs, the lab results, the medication records, Dorothy's statement, the blood panel, the hospital records showing Nathan's unauthorized changes to the prescription protocol. Nathan sat with his attorney and said nothing. His face was a controlled surface, but underneath it I could see something working. The calculation of a man trying to find an exit in a room with no doors. Diane sat across from him. She looked at the evidence on the table, and then her shoulders dropped. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouting, just a quiet, complete release, like a person setting down something very heavy that they have been carrying for a very long time. Her posture changed. Her expression changed. All the careful architecture of her face, the composure, the performance, the permanent readiness for an audience, simply fell away. She looked, for the first time since I had known her, like a person rather than a presentation. "I didn't want to kill him," she said. The room was very still. The officer leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, what did you want?" Diane looked at the table. "I wanted it to happen naturally. I wanted his illness to progress the way illnesses progress. I wanted it to look like it was just happening." A pause. He was going to give it all away. The foundation, the research fund. He'd been planning it for over a year. Most of the estate. Nathan found out 8 months ago from the attorney's office. And that motivated the decision to accelerate his decline? She didn't answer immediately. She looked at her hands. "Nathan said it would be untraceable," she said quietly. "He said it would look like the illness. He said no one would know." Nathan's attorney put a hand on his arm. Nathan shook it off. "Diane," he said, his voice tight and low. "Do not say anything else." She looked at her brother. Something passed between them. Not affection, not warmth, just the recognition of two people who have been bound together in something that has finally come apart. "Nathan said the doctor already had concerns," she continued. "He said he would manage it, that he would handle the prescriptions and the doctor, and everything would proceed." "Diane," Nathan's voice had an edge now. "And that by the time anyone questioned anything, it would be too late to matter." Nathan stood up. "I want to speak to my attorney privately." "Sit down, Mr. Whitmore," the officer said. Nathan sat down. Diane looked at me for the first time since they'd arrived. Really looked at me. And the thing I saw in her face was something I had not expected to find there. Not hatred, not defiance, but something that looked very much like exhaustion. Deep, structural exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has been afraid for a very long time and is finally, terribly, relieved to stop. "You stole our future," she said. Her voice was flat. She wasn't accusing. She was stating something she had believed so fully for so long that it had become the shape of the world. I looked back at her steadily. "No, Diane," I said. "Your father decided to do something generous with what he'd built. That wasn't theft. That was his right." I paused. "You destroyed your own future, long before I walked through that front door." She looked away. Nathan was arrested that evening for conspiracy, unauthorized medical interference, and a charge that his attorney was already working to narrow and qualify. Diane was charged with aggravated poisoning and attempted murder. When the officers led them out through the front door of the Whitmore estate, past the paintings and the marble floors and the sweeping staircase, Diane did not look back. Nathan did, once. A single look over his shoulder at the house he had spent his adult life positioning himself to own. I watched the door close behind them, and I stood alone in the hallway in the sudden quiet. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt something more complicated. A grief for the waste of it. The pointless, terrible waste of what two people with every advantage had chosen to do. And underneath that grief, small but steady, something warm, something like relief, something like the feeling of a door opening into clean air. Dorothy came and stood beside me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then she said, "I'll make tea." A pause. Proper tea, from scratch. Despite everything, I laughed. Edward's recovery was not fast. I want to be honest about that too. He was not a man in a movie who sits up in bed the morning after the villain is caught and announces he feels wonderful. He was a real man, in a real hospital, whose body had been put through a sustained and deliberate assault for the better part of a year. Recovery from that is slow. It is incremental. It is 2 steps forward and 1 step back on the bad days. But it was real. Within a week of the poisoning stopping, no more tea, no more altered prescriptions, no more unauthorized medications. His blood work began to shift. Slowly, the toxin levels dropped. His liver function, which had been declining at an alarming rate, stabilized. Dr. Hartley called it remarkable and then corrected himself. Not remarkable. Expected. This is what the body does when you stop poisoning it. 2 weeks in, Edward was sitting up without assistance. 3 weeks in, he was talking. "Grace," he said one afternoon. I was in the chair beside his bed, the same chair I had spent so many nights in, reading with the lamp turned low. He said my name and I looked up. "I'm here," I said. He looked at me for a long time. His eyes were clearer than they had been in months. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little." "You should sleep more." "You should worry less about my sleeping habits and more about doing your physical therapy exercises," I told him. He almost smiled, then fully smiled. "There she is," he said quietly. "There's the woman I married." I reached over and took his hand. "You stayed," he said. "Of course I stayed. I was afraid you might not. Once it was over, once there was no longer a situation requiring your attention." I looked at him carefully. "Edward, I stopped staying out of obligation a long time ago." "When?" I thought about it honestly. "Somewhere around the 3rd week," I said. "When you asked me about Robert. When you listened to me answer for 20 minutes and then asked a follow-up question that told me you'd actually heard every word." He was quiet for a moment. I was a fool not to see what was happening sooner. "You trusted your children," he said. "That's not foolishness. That's just love. Betrayal is their choice. It was never your failure." He closed his eyes. His fingers tightened around mine. "You're wiser than I am," he said. "I'm older than I look," I told him, and he laughed. A real laugh, from the chest, the first one I had heard in months, and the sound of it filled that hospital room like something returning from a long way away. 3 months later, on a bright April morning, Edward Whitmore stood in the atrium of Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, and announced the creation of the Whitmore Foundation for Cancer Research. He stood at a podium with a cane he was still using on difficult days, and he spoke for 12 minutes in a clear, steady voice about what the foundation would do: fund research, subsidize treatment costs for families who couldn't afford specialized care, partner with hospitals across the state to expand access to clinical trials. He said near the end that the foundation existed because of several things. Because of a disease that had changed his perspective on time. Because of a woman named Grace Holloway, who had walked across a room with a glass of water and taught him, without intending to, what genuine care looked like. And because of a brother named Robert, who had beaten cancer and in doing so had given his sister a reason to fight. Robert was in the front row. He had walked in under his own power that morning, which was a thing we had not been entirely certain would happen 3 months prior. His latest scan had come back clean. Clean, that word. I had read it 4 times in the doctor's office, just to make sure it said what I thought it said. When Edward finished speaking, Robert leaned over to me and said quietly into my ear, "You saved 2 lives, Grace." I shook my head. "I just refused to be quiet," I said. Robert put his arm around my shoulders. "Same thing," he said. Nathan's legal process took the better part of a year. His attorney was skilled and the charges were complex, and the proceedings were, as legal proceedings tend to be, long and grinding and unglamorous. He was ultimately convicted on charges of conspiracy and deliberate medical interference. He received a sentence that included time served and a mandatory rehabilitation program. He was removed permanently from all controlling positions within Edward's companies. Diane's case moved differently. Her confession, partial, impulsive, and ultimately complete, simplified certain things while complicating others. She was convicted of aggravated poisoning. The attempted murder charge was reduced, on the basis of evidence and her attorney's arguments, to a lesser count. She was sentenced to a rehabilitation program and a period of supervised release. Edward's will was updated legally and carefully, with Gerald Ashworth overseeing every page. The foundation received the substantial majority of the estate. Nathan and Diane were not disinherited entirely. Edward was not a man who made decisions from anger, but their roles in his legacy were reduced to what he had decided was fair, and what they had decided to do had no bearing on that fairness. Some months after the trial concluded, I visited Nathan in a supervised meeting room at the facility where he was completing his program. He looked smaller without his suits, without his context. The sharp edges of him had worn down into something quieter. We sat across a small table and were quiet for a moment. "Why did you come?" he asked. "I'm not entirely sure," I said. "I think because I wanted to ask you something." "Ask." "Why didn't you just talk to him? Just sit down with your father and tell him you were afraid of losing what he'd built? Tell him what you needed?" Nathan looked at his hands. A long silence. "I didn't know how," he said finally. In that house growing up, we didn't talk about being afraid. We didn't talk about needing things. You either had power or you didn't." He paused. "I didn't know how to just ask for something. I only knew how to take it." I sat with that. "Fear makes people do terrible things," I said. "I know that. I understand it." I leaned forward slightly. "But choices still matter, Nathan. Fear doesn't make the choice. You do." He nodded slowly. Not in agreement, necessarily. In the way a person nods when they are hearing something they already know and have been trying not to know. I left the facility that afternoon and drove back through Nashville with the windows down and the April air coming in, and I thought about all of it. The pill bottle in the marble bathroom, the church wedding in the hospital chapel, Dorothy folding linens with her careful hands, Robert in his garden chair, Edward laughing in his hospital room. Diane sent me a letter 6 months later from her rehabilitation program. It was handwritten, 2 pages, the handwriting of someone who had taken time and care with each word. She said she had spent a long time believing that love was a finite resource, that if her father gave it elsewhere, there would be less for her, that if he gave his wealth to strangers, it meant his children had not been worth it. She said she knew now that this was not how love or wealth or legacy worked, that her father's generosity did not diminish her, that her fear had never been about money, not really. "I thought you were replacing us," she wrote. "I understand now that he was expanding, and that I could not see the difference." I read the letter twice, then I folded it and put it in the drawer of my nightstand, where I kept the things I wanted to remember. The Whitmore estate does not feel cold anymore. I don't know exactly when that changed. Somewhere between the investigations and the recovery and the slow, ordinary business of 2 people building a life together in the space that remains after all the pretense has been cleared away. But the house is different now. Lighter. The marble floors are the same and the paintings are the same, and the staircase still curves upward like something from a movie. But there are flour-dusted baking tins in the kitchen now, because I bake on Tuesday and Thursday mornings and sometimes on Sunday when the mood takes me. There is a garden chair on the back terrace where Edward sits in the afternoons when the weather is good, working on foundation business or simply reading. There is a guest room permanently reserved for Robert, who visits once a month and fills whatever room he's in with the kind of warmth that doesn't require any preparation. Dorothy is still here. She will be, I think, for as long as she wants to be. Some mornings she makes the tea and some mornings I do, and we have never once discussed the significance of that, because we don't need to. Some evenings, Edward and I sit on the terrace and watch the light change over the grounds, and he will look at me in the way he has developed over these months, quietly, with the particular attention of someone who has learned not to take the view for granted, and he will say something small, something like, "Good day today," and I will say, "Yes, good day," and that will be enough, more than enough, that will be everything. I married a man I barely knew to save the brother I loved more than almost anything in the world. I walked into a house full of secrets and found myself in the middle of something I had never prepared for and never expected. I am 67 years old. I have silver hair and reading glasses I can never find, and hands that have been in bread dough more mornings than I can count. I am not a detective. I am not a lawyer. I am not a hero of any kind that would make sense in a story. I am a woman who paid attention. I am a woman who, when something felt wrong, did not talk herself out of the feeling. Who did not decide that staying quiet was safer than speaking up? Who did not let the size of the house or the weight of the money or the smoothness of Nathan Whitmore's smile convince her that what she was seeing was not what she was seeing? My brother told me once, from a hospital bed, that silence only protects the people doing wrong. He was right. He has always been right about the things that matter. If there is one thing I want you to carry away from this story, it is this: the moment when everything feels most impossible, when you are standing in a cold marble bathroom at 2 a.m. with a pill bottle in your shaking hands and a house full of secrets pressing in around you, that is not the moment to go quiet. That is the moment to pay attention. That is the moment to hold on. And that is the moment to trust that the truth, however long it takes, however patient it must be, the truth always finds its way to the surface. I was never just a grandmother. I was never just a baker. I was never just a simple woman from Tennessee who married the wrong man for the right reasons. I was the woman who refused to be silent. And in the end, that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somewhere out there is a woman, maybe your age, maybe older, maybe younger, who is standing in her own marble bathroom, holding her own impossible situation, wondering if she has enough left in her to fight. Tell her she does. Tell her the quietest person in the room is sometimes the most powerful one of all, not because she raises her voice, but because she refuses to lose hers.